I never believed in near-death experiences. To me, they were always just stories, exaggerations, or desperate cries for attention. I considered myself a rational person, grounded in logic and reason. But what happened to me changed my life forever. My name is Stephanie, and I was born and raised in Guatemala. For 34 years, I was certain of who I was and what I believed. I prided myself on being independent, strong-willed, and self-sufficient. Since childhood, I had learned that relying on others was a mistake. My mother, a woman hardened by life's betrayals, taught me that men were not to be trusted. I carried that belief with me, using it as armor against the world. When I was 16, I realized that I wasn't attracted to boys. Girls interested me more. I embraced this truth about myself and built an identity that reinforced my independence. I never saw the need for a man in my life. Not emotionally, not physically, not in any way. If something broke in my house, I fixed it. If I needed to carry something heavy, I did it myself. That self-reliance became a source of pride, until one night, when it became my downfall. I was home alone, like always, when the light bulb on my porch burned out. Without hesitation, I grabbed a ladder and climbed up to replace it. It was something I had done countless times before, but that night was different. As I stretched my arm to screw in the new bulb, I lost my balance. My foot slipped, and before I could react, I was falling. The last thing I remember was the impact, pain, a loud ringing in my ears, and then silence. Everything went black. There was no pain, no sound, no sensation at all. It felt like I had been pulled out of existence. Then suddenly I was back, but not in my body. I saw myself lying on the floor, motionless. It was an image that sent a shockwave through me. My body was there, but I was somewhere else. I tried to move, to reach out, to touch something solid, but my hands passed through everything. Panic set in. What was happening to me? Before I could process it, I heard footsteps. My neighbor, Carlos, had heard the crash and was rushing toward my house. I watched as he found me, his face filled with shock and fear. He called my name, shook my shoulders, but I didn't respond. He checked my pulse, then grabbed his phone. Everything was happening right in front of me, yet I had no control over any of it. Moments later, I was being lifted into an ambulance. I watched the paramedics work frantically, trying to revive me. I saw my own lifeless face, my body completely still. It didn't seem real. Then, as we arrived at the hospital, something even more terrifying happened. I felt a force pulling me away, dragging me upward. I was no longer in the ambulance. I was floating above it, then above the hospital itself. The world below grew smaller as darkness surrounded me. But it wasn't an ordinary darkness. It was an emptiness, a void so complete that it felt alive. And in that emptiness, I wasn't alone. At first, I heard whispers. Then, those whispers turned into voices. They were speaking about me. She never believed, they said. She always rejected the truth. Their words sent a shiver through me. Who were they? Where was I? I tried to speak, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but there was nothing to move toward. I was weightless, drifting in this endless void, completely at its mercy. Fear gripped me like never before. And then, I saw it. A light, distant at first, but growing closer. That light carried something with it. Something I couldn't describe at the time. A presence. A power. And as it approached, everything I had ever believed about life and death was about to be shattered. The light was unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't just brightness. It was alive. It pulsated, radiating a warmth that I could feel even in my disembodied state. It wasn't like the sun, harsh and blinding. Instead, it was inviting, pulling me toward it. And yet, as I drifted closer, fear clawed at my chest. I wasn't ready. I didn't understand what was happening, but there was no resisting it. The void that had held me in silence just moments ago was now fading, swallowed by this overwhelming presence. As I moved toward the light, the voices from the darkness grew distant, but their words echoed in my mind. She never believed. She always rejected the truth. A cold realization washed over me. I had spent my whole life certain that this moment would never come, that death was simply the end. But now here I was, faced with something greater than I could comprehend. The weight of that truth pressed down on me. If I had been wrong about this, what else had I been wrong about? Then something even more unexpected happened. The light began to take shape. At first, it was only a vague silhouette, barely distinguishable from the radiance around it. But as I drew closer, the details became clear. A figure stood before me, glowing with an intensity that defied explanation. My breath, or whatever remained of it, caught in my throat. I knew who it was before I even fully saw him. Jesus. Every part of me wanted to deny it, to tell myself that my mind was fabricating this moment, that it was just a hallucination. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was real, more real than anything I had ever experienced. And that realization filled me with both awe and dread. Because if he was real, then everything I had ignored, everything I had rejected, was real too. I wanted to run, to hide, to escape his gaze, but there was nowhere to go. I was suspended in this endless space, completely exposed. My entire life flashed before me. Not just the events, but the emotions, the choices, the beliefs that had shaped me. And standing before him, I felt smaller than I ever had. Not because he made me feel unworthy, but because for the first time I truly saw myself. Then, he spoke. His voice wasn't like the voices from the darkness. It wasn't condemning, wasn't filled with accusations. It was steady, deep, filled with something I couldn't understand yet. "Stephanie," he said, and the sound of my name from his lips sent a shiver through me. "You have always been mine." Something inside me broke. I had spent my life convincing myself that I was in control, that I didn't need anyone, that I had built my own path. But here, in his presence, I saw the truth. I had never been alone. Even in my rejection, even in my certainty, he had been there, watching, waiting. And now, I had no choice but to face him. I stood frozen in front of him, my mind racing with questions I couldn't voice. His presence was overwhelming, not in a way that crushed me, but in a way that exposed me. Every defense I had ever built, every wall I had constructed to keep people out, was meaningless here. Before him, I wasn't strong. I wasn't independent. I was just me. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if that was enough. He took a step forward, and I instinctively stepped back, though there was no ground beneath me. His eyes held something I couldn't define. They weren't accusing, but they saw everything. Every decision, every mistake, every time I had turned my back on faith, on love, on the idea that there was something greater than myself. And yet, there was no anger, only knowing. I wanted to speak, but my voice didn't work here. I didn't need words. He already knew what I wanted to ask. The shame inside me burned hotter than any fire. I had spent my life rejecting this moment, denying that any of this could be real. But now, with him standing before me, I couldn't run from the truth. He had always been there, even when I ignored him, even when I refused to see. A wave of emotion crashed over me. I wanted to cry, but I didn't know if I still could. The weight of my life pressed down on me. Not just the choices I had made, but the ones I had refused to make. The moments I had shut him out, the times I had chosen my pride over grace. I had lived my life convinced that I didn't need saving. But here, in this moment, I had never felt more in need of mercy. His voice reached me again, steady and unshakable. "You have carried a burden that was never yours to bear." The words sliced through me, raw and real. I had spent years building my identity on pain, on anger, on the belief that I had to fight to survive. But what if survival wasn't meant to be a battle? What if I had spent all this time carrying something I was never meant to hold? Tears, real or not, welled up inside me. I had always believed I was strong because I didn't rely on anyone. But now, standing before him, I understood the truth. I wasn't strong. I was just afraid. Afraid of being hurt. Afraid of being abandoned. Afraid of trusting in something beyond myself. But here, in the presence of the one who knew me better than I knew myself, those fears felt small. I had no control here. No walls left to hide behind. And in that terrifying, humbling moment, I realized something. Maybe I had never been in control at all. Maybe all the strength I had clung to was just an illusion. And maybe, just maybe, letting go wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the first real step toward freedom. The silence between us was not empty. It carried weight, meaning a depth I couldn't explain. I had never known silence to feel like this, so full, so alive, so completely inescapable. And yet, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. For years, I had filled my life with noise, distractions, anything to avoid moments like this. But here, in this silence, I found something I had never expected. I found clarity. I had spent my life running from the idea of faith, from the thought that there was something beyond what I could see and touch. I had convinced myself that belief was for the weak, for those who needed a crutch to make sense of life. But now, standing before the one I had denied, I saw that I had been the one who was blind. Faith wasn't weakness, it was courage, and I had been too afraid to see it. His eyes never left mine. There was no judgment in them, no disappointment, only an invitation. A question I had avoided my whole life. Will you trust me? The simplicity of it shook me. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a command. It was a choice, one that had always been mine to make. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to surrender, to fall into his presence and let it consume me. But something inside me still hesitated. The part of me that had spent years building walls, shielding myself from hurt, from trust, from hope. The part of me that whispered, what if? What if I was wrong? What if surrendering meant losing myself? I had spent my entire life defining myself by what I was against weakness, against dependence, against belief. But what was I for? What did I stand for? In this moment, faced with the only truth that mattered, I realized I had no answer. Because without my anger, without my fear, without my pride, who was I? His voice broke through my thoughts. I know you. The words were so simple, so undeniable that they left no room for argument. I wanted to resist, but I couldn't. Because deep down I knew it was true. He knew me, the real me. Not just the version I had built to protect myself. Not just the strong, independent mask I wore. He saw everything, the pain, the doubt, the loneliness I'd never admitted to anyone. And he still called me his. Something inside me cracked. I had spent so long fighting, so long pushing away anything that felt like surrender. But here now, I was beginning to understand. Surrender wasn't giving up. It wasn't losing. It was choosing. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to choose. The weight of my past felt like it was crushing me. Not because he was holding it against me, but because for the first time, I was seeing it clearly. Every decision, every moment I had turned away, every time I had refused to listen. It all came flooding back, washing over me like a tide I couldn't escape. And yet, beneath the sorrow, there was something else, a whisper of hope. I had always believed that if there was a God, he would want nothing to do with me, that my choices, my mistakes, had pushed me too far away. But standing here, face to face with the truth I had ignored for so long, I saw how wrong I had been. There was no distance too great, no mistake too heavy. He had never turned away from me. I had been the one running. And now I had a choice to make. His voice reached me again, steady and patient. You don't have to carry this anymore. The words cut through the fear, through the doubt. He wasn't asking me to fix myself. He wasn't waiting for me to prove my worth. He was simply offering what had always been mine to take. Grace, love, redemption. My heart pounded. Could it really be that simple? Could I let go of everything I had clung to for so long? The anger, the resentment, the fear of trusting in something greater than myself? I had spent my life believing I had to be strong, that I had to do everything on my own. But maybe true strength wasn't in holding on. Maybe it was in letting go. Tears welled up again, but this time they weren't from fear. They weren't from shame. They were from something else. Relief. Because in that moment, I knew the truth. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone, and I didn't have to fight anymore. Slowly, tentatively, I lifted my head, met his gaze, and as I did, I felt it. The first flicker of something I had never allowed myself to feel. Hope. Not the kind I had dismissed before. The kind that felt fragile, like it could be broken. No, this was something stronger, something real. And for the first time, I was ready to embrace it. The moment I lifted my head, something shifted. It wasn't visible, but I felt it in every part of me. A weight that had been pressing down on me for years was suddenly lighter. It wasn't gone. Not yet. But for the first time, I realized I didn't have to carry it alone. He had been waiting for this. waiting for me to finally look at him, to see him for who he truly was. Not a distant figure, not a myth or a story, but real, present, here. I had spent my entire life believing that love was conditional, that trust was a weakness, that to survive, I had to rely on no one but myself. And yet, standing before him, I saw how empty that belief had left me. I had built my life around independence, around proving that I didn't need anyone. But the truth was, I had been starving for something deeper, something real, something I had denied myself out of fear. His eyes never left me. They held no accusation, no disappointment, only understanding, only love. And that love was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't earned. It wasn't given in exchange for good behavior or for meeting expectations. It simply was. It had always been. Even when I didn't believe in him, even when I had rejected the very idea of him, he had loved me still. I felt something stir inside me, something deep and unspoken, a longing I had buried beneath years of certainty, of defiance. I had spent so much time fighting against what I didn't believe that I had never allowed myself to truly seek what was real. And now, here it was, standing before me, offering itself freely. Not because I deserved it, not because I had done anything to earn it, but because that was who he was. The thought terrified me. If I accepted this, if I allowed myself to believe, then everything would change. Who would I be without the identity I had built? Without the armor I had wrapped around myself for so long? Would I even recognize myself? But another thought pushed through the fear. Who had I been before all of this? Who was I meant to be? For so long, I had believed that surrender was weakness, that faith was blind. But looking at him, I saw the truth. Surrender wasn't about giving up. It was about stepping into something greater, something that had always been waiting for me. And faith wasn't blindness. It was finally seeing for the first time. I took a breath, or at least I thought I did. In this place, I wasn't sure if breath even existed, but I felt the movement, the shift, the decision forming inside me. I was tired of fighting, tired of carrying the weight of my own defiance. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go. The moment I decided to stop resisting, everything around me changed. It wasn't sudden or violent. It was subtle, like a veil being lifted. The air around us seemed brighter, warmer, though there was no sun, no sky, nothing familiar to compare it to. It was as if, in that instant, I had stepped into something I had been blind to all along. He took a step closer, and this time, I didn't move away. The fear that had been gripping me so tightly was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't the fear of being wrong or of losing myself. It was the fear of stepping into something so vast, so limitless that I couldn't comprehend it. But even that fear was beginning to fade, because the more I stood in his presence, the more I understood. I had never been more myself than I was in this moment. For years, I had convinced myself that I knew who I was, that my beliefs, my choices, my identity were solid, unshakable. But now, faced with the truth, I saw how fragile it all had been. I had built my life on a foundation of pain, of anger, of fear disguised as strength. And now, that foundation was crumbling. But the strange thing was, I wasn't afraid of that anymore. I wasn't afraid of losing what I had been, because I was beginning to understand that I had been lost all along. And in this moment, I was being found. Not by force, not by demand, but by love. He reached out his hand. It was the simplest of gestures, yet it held more meaning than anything I had ever experienced. I stared at it, hesitating, not because I didn't want to take it, but because I knew, once I did, there would be no going back. This wasn't just a moment. This was a choice that would shape the rest of my life. I took another breath, steadying myself. And then, slowly, I lifted my own hand. The instant our fingers touched, warmth flooded through me. Not like fire, not like heat, but something deeper. It was peace. It was belonging. It was the answer I had been searching for without even knowing it. And in that moment, I knew. I was his, and I always had been. The moment stretched between us, filled with something beyond words. I had spent my entire life seeking control, grasping at independence as if it were my only lifeline. But now, standing here, I saw the truth. I had never been in control. I had been holding on to an illusion, convincing myself that I was strong because I had no one to rely on. But real strength wasn't isolation. It wasn't self-sufficiency. It was trust. And I had never trusted anyone. Not fully. Not even myself. I looked into his eyes, searching for something I couldn't quite define. Was I waiting for permission? For reassurance? For some final confirmation that I wasn't making a mistake? But he said nothing. He simply held my gaze, unwavering, steady, patient. He was letting me choose. He had always let me choose. I thought about everything I had built my life around. The beliefs I had held onto so fiercely. The way I had justified my anger, my pain, my fear. If I accepted this, if I accepted him, what would it mean for everything I had been before? Could I really let it all go? But the answer was already there, waiting beneath my hesitation. I wasn't losing myself. I was finally stepping into who I had always been meant to be. The pieces of my life that had felt so disconnected, so fragmented, were finally coming together. And the weight I had carried for so long, the burden of trying to define myself on my own terms, was finally lifting. Slowly, I nodded. It was a small movement, but in this moment it felt like the most important thing I had ever done. His expression didn't change, but I felt something shift in the air around us. Not relief, not celebration, just certainty, as if this had always been the path I was meant to take. His voice broke the silence, soft but steady. Then come, and without hesitation, I did. The moment I moved toward him, I felt the world shift around me. The darkness that had once held me captive was gone. The weight of my past, the fears that had chained me, the doubts that had kept me from seeing the truth, all of it was fading. I was stepping into something new, something unknown. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had spent my life convinced that faith was blind, that surrender was weakness. But now, I saw the truth. Faith wasn't about closing your eyes and hoping for the best. It was about opening them to what had been there all along. And surrender wasn't about giving up. It was about stepping into something greater. I reached for him, and he pulled me forward. And as he did, I felt something inside me change. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, not something I could put into words. It was quieter, deeper, a knowing, a certainty that I had never had before. I had spent my life searching for answers, fighting against the idea of something greater than myself. But now, I had found what I didn't even know I had been looking for. I was home. The moment I took that step, I felt as if the entire universe had shifted around me. It wasn't the kind of change that comes with loud proclamations or sudden revelations. It was deeper than that, quieter. It was the kind of change that settles into your soul without effort, as if it had been waiting all along. I had resisted for so long, convinced that surrender meant losing myself. But in this moment, I saw how wrong I had been. I wasn't losing anything. I was gaining everything. The world I had built for myself, the identity I had clung to, the independence I had worshipped, they had all been walls, keeping me from what I was truly meant to be. I had spent years fortifying those walls, making sure no one could get too close, making sure I never had to depend on anything or anyone. But now, standing here, I saw those walls for what they really were. They weren't strength, they were fear, and fear had no place here. I felt his presence around me, steady and unwavering. He wasn't forcing me forward. He wasn't pushing me into something I wasn't ready for. He was simply here, waiting, holding space for me to step fully into what had always been mine. The choice had never been taken from me. It had always been mine to make. I took another step, and then another. Each movement felt like shedding something I had carried for too long. The weight of my past, the lies I had told myself, the idea that I had to figure everything out on my own. It all began to fall away. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to control what came next. I wasn't planning, calculating, making sure I had an escape route. I was just present. And for the first time, that was enough. As I walked forward, memories flooded my mind. Not in a chaotic, overwhelming way, but with a clarity I had never known before. I saw moments from my childhood, times when I had been afraid, times when I had felt alone, times when I had convinced myself that I had no one to rely on. But now, looking back, I saw something I had never noticed before. I had never truly been alone. Even in the moments I thought no one was watching, he had been there. The quiet reassurances, the unexplainable comforts, the times when I should have broken but somehow found the strength to keep going. They weren't coincidences. They were evidence. I had spent my life searching for proof that he didn't exist, that faith was just a crutch for those who needed something to hold on to. But I had been looking in the wrong places. The proof had always been in the small things, the moments of grace, the times I'd been spared when I shouldn't have been, the love that had been waiting for me, even when I refused to see it. Tears welled up, but they weren't from pain. They were from the realization that I had wasted so much time running from something that had never been chasing me. He had never forced himself into my life. He had never demanded my faith. He had simply waited, patiently, silently, knowing that one day I would come back. And now, here I was. I closed my eyes, letting the memories wash over me. The wounds of my past, the pain I had held on to for so long, the fear that had driven so many of my choices. It was all there, but it no longer controlled me. It no longer defined me. For the first time, I was free. I opened my eyes, expecting to still be in the same place, but everything had changed. The space around me was no longer empty. It was filled with light, not the harsh, blinding kind, but a warmth that surrounded me, held me. It felt like stepping into something familiar, something I had always known, but had somehow forgotten. I turned back for a moment, looking at where I had come from. The darkness that had once surrounded me was still there, but it no longer felt like it had power over me. I had spent my life fearing it, believing it was all there was. But now, I saw it for what it truly was, an absence, not a force. It had only held me because I had let it, and now I was letting it go. He was still there, watching me, waiting. He hadn't moved, hadn't changed. The only thing that had changed was me. I took a breath, steadying myself. And then, with a certainty I had never known before, I turned fully toward the light and stepped forward. Each step I took felt lighter, as if I was shedding years of weight I had never realized I was carrying. The fears that had shaped me, the doubts that had dictated my choices, the anger that had fueled me, all of it was losing its grip. I had spent so long believing that those things made me strong, but now, with every step toward him, I saw them for what they really were, chains. And for the first time I was walking free. The light around me grew warmer, wrapping around me like something tangible. It wasn't just brightness, it was presence. It was love. A love that had always been there, waiting for me to turn around and see it. I had fought so hard against the idea of surrender, convinced that it meant giving up control. But now, I understood. Surrender wasn't losing. It was finding. It was stepping into what had always been meant for me. I thought of all the years I had spent running, all the ways I had tried to fill the emptiness, to prove to myself and the world that I didn't need anyone. But the truth was, I had been searching all along. I just hadn't known what I was searching for. I had been looking in the wrong places, trying to silence a hunger that couldn't be satisfied by anything but this. I slowed, suddenly aware of just how far I had come. The darkness was gone. The weight of my past no longer clung to me. I felt lighter, stronger, as if for the first time, I was standing in who I truly was, who I had always been meant to be. He stood before me waiting. There was no urgency in him, no impatience, just a steady, unshakable presence, a reminder that he had always been here, even when I had refused to see him, even when I had turned away. I took one last look at everything I had been before, every piece of myself that had been built on fear and pain. And then, with a breath that felt like the first I had ever taken, I let it go. The moment I let go, I felt something shift inside me. A peace I had never known settled deep in my soul. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from having all the answers or knowing what the future holds. It was deeper than that. It was the peace of knowing I was no longer alone. I had spent my life trying to be enough on my own, trying to prove that I didn't need anything beyond myself. But now, I saw the truth. I had never been created to walk this life alone. I had never been expected to carry the weight of my own existence without help. I had just been too afraid to trust in something greater, but now I did. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to turn away. I didn't feel shame, or fear, or doubt. I felt seen, known, loved. Not because of what I had done, not because I had earned it, but simply because that was who he was. Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't from pain. They weren't from regret. They were from relief, from gratitude, from the overwhelming realization that I had been searching for this my entire life without even knowing it. He reached out his hand again, but this time, I didn't hesitate. I took it without fear, without doubt. And the moment I did, everything around me was flooded with light. And then, in an instant, I was falling. I gasped, my lungs burning as air rushed back into them. My chest heaved, my body jolting with the force of being pulled back into existence. The world around me was too bright, too loud, too sharp. My heart pounded wildly, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I was back. The beeping of machines, the hum of voices, the sterile scent of the hospital. It all crashed over me at once. I blinked, my vision adjusting, my limbs feeling foreign and heavy. And then, I heard it. "She's back! My God, she's back!" A nurse's voice filled with shock and awe cut through the haze. I turned my head, my movements sluggish, my body aching in ways I couldn't even describe. Faces hovered over me. Doctors, nurses, people I didn't recognize. But none of them mattered, because I knew the truth. I had died, and now I was alive again. But I wasn't the same person who had left. The memory of his presence, his voice, his love, it was still with me, burned into my soul in a way that nothing could erase. I had been given a second chance, and now I had a choice to make. I could go back to the life I had known. I could pretend none of this had happened, convince myself it was just a dream, a trick of the mind. Or I could embrace the truth. I could step fully into the life I had been given, no longer bound by fear, no longer running from the one who had been waiting for me all along. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just alive. I had been made new, and I would never be the same again. I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at something much greater, a chance to walk in truth, to step into the love I had spent so long rejecting, to finally embrace the freedom that had been waiting for me all along. I knew now that my life would never be the same. How could it be? I had seen what most people spend their entire lives searching for. I had experienced what it meant to truly be known, to be seen, to be loved beyond anything I could comprehend. And now, I had a choice to make. I could have stayed silent. I could have convinced myself that no one would believe me, that the world would mock what I had seen. But I couldn't do that, because this wasn't just about me. This was about you, about every person who has ever felt lost, broken, abandoned, about every soul that has spent years searching for something real, for something more. If you are watching this, if you are listening to my words, know this: you are not alone. You never have been. No matter what you've done, no matter how far you've run, no matter how many times you've convinced yourself that you don't need anyone, he is still there, waiting, calling, loving you even when you refuse to love yourself. I can't make the choice for you. No one can. But I can tell you this: there is no life more full, no peace more real, no love more powerful than the one that is found in him. I spent years searching for meaning in all the wrong places, believing that I had to create my own purpose, that I had to be strong enough on my own. But I was never meant to do this alone, and neither are you. If you feel something stirring inside you, don't ignore it. If something in this story has resonated with you, don't push it away. Take the first step. Call out to him. Ask him to reveal himself to you. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing. He will meet you where you are, just like he met me. If this message has spoken to you, I encourage you. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Let someone else hear the truth that has the power to change everything. And if you are ready to take a step closer, if you want to continue growing in faith, then make sure you subscribe to this channel. This isn't just about a story. This is about a journey. A journey toward truth, toward love, toward the life you were always meant to live. And remember, you are not alone. You are deeply loved. You were created for a purpose greater than you can imagine, and he is waiting for you with open arms. Thank you for walking through this moment with me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for opening your heart, even if just for a moment, to the possibility that there is something more. I hope you'll continue this journey with me. I hope you'll seek him not just in my words, but in your own heart. Until next time, stay strong, stay open, and above all, seek the truth. I'll be here waiting for you, and so will he.